Same old Pitt. It's going to be hard to deny that right now as the Pitt Panthers fall to Western Michigan, 44-41, losing to a MAC school a week after beating an SEC school, and a big victory at the time, said to be a staple win over Tennessee. That on the road in Knoxville, this a home loss against the MAC team for the Pitt Panthers. This is a Pitt edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm your host, as always, Mike Asti, and I am going to be joined by one of our contributors throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks, especially one of our interns over there at Steelers Now. So one of my colleagues throughout this network, Austin Bechtold, who is actually joining me from the press box of his game that he'll be calling later on this evening. So I definitely really appreciate the time, Austin, his Pittsburgh Sports Live debut. And as I said, Pitt disappoints. Certainly pops the balloon in the excitement for Pitt's big win over Tennessee. Kenny Pickett, though, 6 touchdowns, tying a record. He also surpassed Dan Marino in this game in terms of total yards in his career. A big day for him, but unfortunately a day he cannot celebrate because his team lets him down. The defense lets him down. He also overcomes an injury in the game. And at the end of the day, despite coming back towards the end and making it a game, Pitt loses again to a Western Michigan MAC school. Not a horrendous Western Michigan team, a good team for the MAC. They are a good team, but certainly a team Pitt was favored to beat by over 2 touchdowns and also a home game. So, Austin, we got to start it here. You're seeing a lot of this on Twitter. Fans are certainly justified to feel this way. I already got some texts from fans who were in attendance. So, same old Pitt. Are you going to discuss same old Pitt? Well, yeah, that's going to have to be the discussion here. And it's going to have to be the discussion now, despite Pat Narduzzi rolling his eyes at this, for the next week, if not the rest of the season now. Same old Pitt. Once again, a big victory, arguably because of the situation, because of where the program is, because of what he has been saying that wait for this year. This is a veteran team. We'll do it this year. The win over Tennessee in Knoxville, arguably the biggest win for Pat Narduzzi, certainly in several years, looking for maybe 9 wins this year. He's not done since being head coach. People were predicting it. Turn around, lose to Western Michigan at home. It's a MAC school. What does that do now for the expectations, the feeling, the excitement that I'd imagine is no longer there around the rest of this season and now around the tenure of Pat Narduzzi? Because now there's a bump in the road after a big speed bump was hurdled over, and certainly have to take something out of the rest of this season, I'd imagine. Yeah,
really appreciate you having me on, Mike. Good to be here with you. And, as Ben Roethlisberger says, don't take the MAC lightly.
Right.
I don't want to say necessarily that's what Pitt did, but after a very encouraging victory at Tennessee last week, whenever you can beat an SEC school as Pitt did, and especially under Narduzzi, when we've seen so many letdowns against teams like, Tennessee isn't the upper echelon of the SEC, but it's still Power 5 school that, is a good program historically to be able to beat, and especially put on this resume in the second
and
game.
on the road too.
Exactly, too. It was a tough environment, always playing in the SEC. So coming into Western Michigan, you're thinking, okay, you're 14-point favorites, 14.5-point favorites. Should be one of those games for Pitt to, control the tempo, control the clock. And the exact opposite happened. Lost the time of possession battle. Western Michigan controlled the ball for 39 minutes. Kenny Pickett only had the ball for around 20, 1944 to be exact. And Pickett can go out and throw 6 touchdown passes, but yet the defense can't stop anything. Literally any analogy you want to make, it would be something that could count for this Pitt defense today. Giving up 44 points at home against the team you're not expected to lose to. I think, as you mentioned, it kind of does feel like a Pitt did Pitt itself once again, where everybody goes to the game. A lot of people aren't able to watch it broadcast on ESPN3 as well, which is another thing that's
a whole nother show we could have. Yeah.
It's been a whole nother bugaboo for Pitt fans over the last couple of seasons, especially with streaming becoming even more and more popular. But to lose this game at home, and it's not like you're looking past this Western Michigan team. Next week you got New Hampshire. So it's not like it's a lookover game. You got to be disappointed. You got to be frustrated. I don't think it really takes away anything from what the rest of the season could be. Pitt's still a very formidable offense. It's just the defense looked especially bad this week, especially being Pat Narduzzi's calling card.
And I also think losing this game this way makes it even worse. Obviously, losing in general after the big win over Tennessee is bad, and certainly is a speed bump for Pitt and going to take the excitement away from this Pitt season that there were a lot of expectations for, even more than last year, the year before. Certainly, Kenny Pickett returning, despite the defensive players that you lost with Hamlin and company, a lot of expectations entering this Pitt season. But not only just losing this game to a MAC school after the big win, losing it where the defense just completely implodes within itself. And Pat Narduzzi, he's even said this: I'm a defensive guy. He certainly has a defensive resume. He certainly had defensive success prior to coming to Pitt. And defenses for a while were not the problem at Pitt. The offense couldn't get it done enough. Even if Pitt would have success, they'd have issues on the ground or with receivers. They're now having it all come together. Yeah, there's some issues, but it's mostly all coming together. They're scoring points at the end of the day. And it just feels to me it's even worse for it to be allowing 44 points to a MAC school and having your defense play so poorly a week after that game against Tennessee, when the only criticism has been these first couple weeks, obviously UMass, you're not going to take that into much consideration, is the defense has still bended. It didn't break enough, but bended. And now we just see it completely fold in this game.
Yeah, and one thing, at least for me, Caleb Ellaby threw for 336 yards, 3 touchdowns. Pitt has been known consistently for being able to get home to the quarterback, have a consistently great pass rush. We've seen it with Rashad Weaver, Jalen Twyman, Patrick Jones, go just down through the list. We didn't see that today. That's been really Pitt's leading way on defense. We saw a lot of busted coverage in the secondary, a lot of guys that were just left out to dry for the corners. And, it just didn't look like a good fundamental game for Pitt. It looks like they just really got away from themselves and what they're really good at, and just leading to this result that not really anybody expected, but at this point early on in the season, I think is something that still definitely can be, learned from, obviously, and just be able to bounce back with next week's game, which should still put Pitt in, double digit spread wise and being favored in the game next week as well, to hopefully be a bounce back game before getting into ACC play.
Yeah, and that's another reason why Pitt kind of needed this win. Obviously, next week you're figuring to be a victory and bounce back. But again, looking impressive next week against New Hampshire. What can you say about that? That'll kind of be like UMass. You're not going to be able to take much out of that victory. You figure it a win for Pitt. But the schedule then does beef up. That schedule does get really, really hard. Not only ACC conference play, but you're looking at a blitz of ranked teams there in a row. You're going to see Clemson. You're going to see Miami. Yeah, Miami had hiccups today as well. But still, Pitt certainly can't take anybody for granted, no matter what hiccups they have, because now Pitt has one on the resume as well. Pitt, as I said, losing 44-41 to Western Michigan, losing to this MAC school a week after the big win over Tennessee, an SEC school. Again, no matter what you think of Tennessee as a middle of the road, they're not who your older brothers or father's Tennessee team was. Maybe they think too much of themselves. Still a big win. Turn around and have this loss here. Austin Bechtold joining us here on the Pitt Postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And Austin, do you feel this game to be an aberration, or did this game expose more on this Pitt defense in particular? Because yes, again, points were scored. Offensively, the only issue for me those first couple weeks was they haven't yet established a legit running back. That's been discussed a lot on these shows to this point. It hasn't yet been an issue. But again, defensively, certainly a bad day at the office for the Pitt Panthers, a horrendous day at the office. Did Pitt get exposed with their issues coming to be a problem and now led to a loss, or an aberration, as we said, a speed bump, and Pitt could still be very competitive in that tough road against those ACC teams coming up?
I think it might be a little too early to tell. I'd like to say it's an aberration, but at the same time, I think you're right on both points, Mike. The defense did completely get exposed for, lack of coverages and lack of a pass rush, and just, there's really not many good things that you can say that this defense did well. Western Michigan went right through them like a knife through butter throughout the whole entire game, just being able to score at will. And, at the end of the game too, when Pitt had an opportunity to get the ball back late in the game with a couple minutes left to go, they weren't able to stop Western Michigan once again. So once we get into these ACC games, starting out with Georgia Tech, it's really going to get to be interesting. With Georgia Tech's a very winnable game, but then once you get into Virginia Tech, who just lost on the road to West Virginia, then Clemson at home, Now, we've seen how Pitt has been able to fare in Death Valley in the past, and it's still not the same old Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, Clemson team.
Right.
But the obvious answer is yes, those games. The obvious answer is those games are obviously going to be able to be the tall tale signs. But right now, I don't want to push all my eggs into one basket and say that this is what Pitt is right now, because let's say, just for instance, it looks like an undefeated offense with a team that's below 500 defensively.
Sure.
But we all know that Pitt's going to be somewhere in the middle, probably a little bit higher on the winning side. But the way that my final takeaway from this Western Michigan game is, if the defense doesn't step up and do anything against an offense from the MAC that is not going to be nearly as special as what you see coming up in ACC play. Tennessee, the quality of play in the SEC is higher than it is in the ACC. I don't think that's any secret to anybody.
No, you have to imagine that Tennessee would be a program that would win a lot more, certainly in the MAC, clipping off victories, and maybe even in the ACC. So they're not what they used to be, but they are in a brutal conference that's only going to get harder. Right.
So I think that's just what you gotta look at, and kind of just hold off a little bit on any big issues with Pitt. Now, obviously, I think if you're talking about concern, panic, or doom, I'm more so of concern.
Okay.
I mean,
I like the way you map that out. Okay, yeah.
We are very early in the season so far. We haven't reached ACC play. Okay. You never want to lose a non-conference game, especially when it's against a non-Power 5 school. But New Hampshire next week, Pitt will probably win by 25, maybe. I mean, we don't even know at this point if that's even going to happen. But let's take this week by week, maybe, game by game, just to decide on what Pitt can be. But once again, we see an early season loss that nobody necessarily was expecting.
Well, concern, panic, or doom, Austin Bechtold is right now at concern, which I think is reasonable, but I'm just going to imagine the Pitt fan base will venture towards doom, whether it's legitimate or not, after this game. They're panicking and potentially moving towards doom. Exactly. They're going to freak out. And again, as much as what you're saying is very logical and true, and it's an out-of-conference game, so if you clip off a big upset in the ACC, some of these teams are weaker than they've been in recent years, even though certainly Clemson's still brutal. Virginia Tech will be tough. Miami's still a talented team, etc. North Carolina's still a ranked team despite their loss earlier in the year. But if you clip off one of them, if you do well the rest of the season, maybe this won't matter. However, Pitt fans, I'm sure, and this is maybe legitimate as well, because this is what's happened over recent years, certainly over the Pat Narduzzi era. If Pitt would win in Blacksburg or beat Miami, or certainly if they would upset Clemson, there's going to be a Pitt fan screaming, if you could do that, why couldn't you beat Western Michigan? And now we're out of this bowl game because of that stupid loss earlier in the year. And honestly, it'd be hard to argue with it because, again, this was certainly a winnable game, certainly a game Pitt should have won. 44-41 lost to Western Michigan here on this day, a week again after the big win in Knoxville against Tennessee. Austin Bechtold joining me here on the Pitt edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here on PSL. Hit that subscribe button, bottom of this video, if you like what you see and hear. It'll give you notifications whenever any content is released here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And also to remind you, head over to Pittsburgh Sports Now right now for all our post-game coverage, Alan Saunders game recap, even some post-game coverage, as well as post-game video coverage. Can't wait to hear from Narduzzi after that one. And it's going to be here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'd imagine a mix of he's going to be upset that anyone's even asking any questions at all. And how could you possibly doubt this team despite what we're just seeing? So I can't wait for that again. That'll be over here on PSL. Now, moving off of the issues, and that certainly was the defense, and that certainly will be a question mark and a concern the rest of the season. The schedule won't be easy, but we'll see what happens. I do want to ask you, too, as someone who's followed the program, and now this is going to be the swan song no matter what it ends up being. Certainly the expectations were high this year. People were saying 9 wins. People had high expectations for this team. Those look to be more in doubt than certainly they would even have been 24 hours ago. But not individually speaking for Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, 6 touchdowns, yards there again. That includes leaving the game with an injury. It was a Willis Reed moment for crying out loud if they would have won this. He's looking like a leader, and he's getting even people with the National Football League and scouts to show more notice. I don't think at any time in his career anyone thought, okay, could be a solid college QB, not a pro guy. He's emerged to really putting together a solid career individually speaking, and becoming a solid quarterback. But what is the legacy of Kenny Pickett for you? Because he still is widely disrespected by a lot of fans. Not much winning has gone on despite the division title. And prior to this year, there was a lot of doubt around him. Some have now come around, but now you see an upset loss, not his fault. But it just almost feels like you feel bad about the era he's doing this in, because he either didn't have enough help around him, or now the defense is collapsing. Just team-wise, it's not there, but individually speaking, appears to me like potentially has put together maybe the most underrated career for a Pitt Panther ever, or at least one of them.
I agree. I think very underrated. Now, we've seen him become the undisputed leader of this offense and really this whole entire program right now for Pitt. And, at the beginning of Kenny Pickett, when we first saw him in his upset win against Miami, that was really that was what Kenny Pickett, I think, was going to be known for. And now it's, it's not really a period of necessarily completely failures, but it's also a point in the Pat Narduzzi era where can Pitt still get over the hump? So I think that the final chapter, I think, is still being written of this book for Kenny Pickett's Pitt career. No one expected him really to be able to come back this season anyway and use his extra year of eligibility.
Yeah,
I think we've kind of seen him, as you said, Mike. He's really taken advantage of every single opportunity this season so far, and has continued to build his way up to, maybe a level of a Nate Peterman type of legacy. We saw Peterman at the game today.
He's holding clipboards in the NFL. He's collecting NFL checks. Yeah,
he is. He is going to be the backup this week for the Raiders, backing up Derek Carr against the Steelers. So we've seen Pickett be able to build on his resume now, and he wasn't a guy that was going to be drafted, if maybe at all. Drafted that high. Maybe he would have been a 5th round pick, 6th round pick, if that. But he is building himself to be potentially more than that, maybe a 3rd round pick, but is showing that he does have the attributes. And he led Pitt in rushing today as well with 49 yards. So we've seen his mobility that has become something ever so frequent between NFL quarterbacks now. So it adds an extra element for Kenny Pickett as well. And this season is going to be determining what the lasting impact is for Pickett moving forward as a Panther in his last season.
You just hope that his legacy doesn't require big wins. Not necessarily saying that would be unfair, because normally as a quarterback, you get credit for big wins and you're going to get blamed when you lose. That just comes with the position. You know that going in. So you want to have some big wins. And he had that one years ago. Certainly few and far between in recent memory. Had one last week, even over Tennessee. But if you're grading him so much on big wins, you're probably going to underrate how good he was. Because again, individually speaking, 23 for 31, including leaving the game with an injury, 382, 6 touchdown, does have the pick. A QB rating that if I even read this, it's ridiculous. It's a video game number out here. 235.1. You mentioned it. 10 carries, 49 yards, an average of 4.9, including a 20-yarder. Pitt's running game is the only issue with this offense this year in terms of establishing a back. And Kenny Pickett's basically said, well, if you can't establish a running back for me, if it's not more than Vincent Davis for 11 or 12, 15 carries a game, I'll do it. So again, incredible individual numbers. He's really built on himself as an individual. I do think he could be worth a flyer as a late round pick. If not, certainly is going to get a free agent signing opportunity. I think he's collecting NFL paychecks, certainly. And I wouldn't have said that even a year ago. So the pandemic gets him back, injuries get him back. He has this year. But the thinking also was, with him back now being so good, becoming the leader and being so even better than he was years ago, this offense now clicking, it's now time for this team to start winning and maybe have that first 9-win season under Narduzzi. The schedule's not even as hard as it was maybe a year ago. Notre Dame, those schools not always, always on the schedule, not on this schedule. And yet we see a loss here after the big win over Tennessee. So that's certainly going to provide some doubt, not to him, but for the program. Austin, just to get you out of here with this, since Pitt does have the next game coming up. Obviously, we talked about the ACC schedule and Murderers Row coming up after, but to be fair here, New Hampshire's first, so noon kickoff in that game 7 days from now, prior to getting that ACC schedule opened up, and that being a gauntlet after Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Clemson, Miami, etc., Duke, then North Carolina and Virginia. But what do you need to see out of this Pitt team against New Hampshire? Do they need to just basically boat race New Hampshire? Do you need to see that? Or do you even care more to see something from this defense to post a shutout, to put something up? What do you need to see? What are keys to that New Hampshire game here as we close up shop?
Well, I definitely would like to see Pitt be able to stop the offense and really the passing game, especially for New Hampshire after having the failures that they did against Western Michigan. Right. If the defense can, shore up a team that we don't really think is going to be able to move the ball on Pitt, that shows some signs, but it's really not that big of a test. I'd really like to see, though, offensively, though, even though the offense has been good, Vincent Davis had 1.7 yards per carry, 12 carries for 20 yards.
Yeah.
This can't be the 2020 Pittsburgh Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger throwing the ball 50 times, and you're not going to be able to run it for Pitt, which, it's a little bit different in college football. I get that, but you're still going to need some balance going forward, especially against these very talented ACC defenses. So, and that kind of just puts it in perspective with Pitt. You're going to be able to need a talented defense to be able to stop some of these high explosive offenses in the ACC as well. And I think it starts with, we think the offense is going to be able to perform really well and be able to show out with Pickett. And even if the running game is not there, the defense has to be the one to step it up, show what they can do, show that they are the quality that they have been in the past, even though there are a decent amount of new faces this season. But I think if Narduzzi can do that and get the defense honed in on a big victory, a big blowout win for Pitt, where the defense only gives up 14 or fewer points, that'll be some good signs moving forward in the ACC play.
I think Pitt needs a big win. Kenny Pickett deserves better from this game, so maybe his thank you needs to be Pitt dominates so much he can sit in the second half or something, give him somewhat of a break with that ACC schedule coming up. And honestly, we're gonna have a West Virginia post-game show here coming up, and you mentioned the Mountaineers' big win over Virginia Tech. You can kind of compare it maybe for that mindset. West Virginia was let down in week one. Maybe we thought they weren't as good as some others thought in terms of the Mountaineer perspective. They kind of laid an egg in that game against Maryland. They came out against LIU. You can't think much of LIU, of course, and what are you going to think about beating them? But they didn't just beat them. It's complete boat racing. They slapped them around 66-0, and then it turned around and led them to a big win over Virginia Tech. Maybe Pitt needs to really, really dominate a team they know they're going to beat, not just win it, but dominate the game, even more so than UMass, because there were some hiccups early in that game against UMass. Pitt maybe needs to kick off dominate the game, and then maybe that'll give them that confidence again. But of course, it's not a disrespect to Western Michigan. They're good for the MAC, but after beating an SEC team on the road that went over Tennessee and what you think out of Pitt this year, that had to be a victory for the Panthers, a 15-point favorite entering, and you end up losing by 3 to Western Michigan. Austin, I appreciate the time, man, for sure. I know you got to prepare for your game, so I appreciate the time. Hopefully you have good luck at your game for yourself at the broadcast. And maybe for the team as well. They're on the field. And I'll be talking to you in some of these group texts, and we'll be checking out your covers throughout the network. So I definitely appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate being on. Hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. So again, Austin Bechtold, who is a contributor with us here at Pittsburgh Sports Now within our family of networks, mostly an intern over there at Steelers Now, actually. So I talk to him a lot at that site that I help run. But here again, same old Pitt. Started off. Same old Pitt with the rhetorical question. I'm back again, closing the show. Same old Pitt, rhetorical question. Pitt, a loss, a loser a week after the big win over Tennessee. So again, that rhetorical question of same old Pitt, it's going to continue. It's going to be asked until Pitt proves it wrong. And that win over Tennessee on the road, as big as it was, gets clouded by this loss here at home against the MAC team in Western Michigan. A good Western Michigan team. They're certainly going to put up points. Pitt knows that more than anybody else. Pitt also loses it in doomsday fashion thanks to the defense collapsing. Pitt 44-41 losers to Western Michigan. Pitt's first loss of the year. A big one next week, you'd imagine, in terms of a big win against a team that's very, very ripe for the picking, a New Hampshire team that Pitt certainly should beat. And then that conference play revving up here again. Check out our post-game coverage over there at Pittsburgh Sports Now. Pitt lets their fans down, and most importantly, lets their quarterback down. Kenny Pickett, a big day, 300+, 6 touchdowns, ends up all for naught as the Pitt Panthers bring up that question of same old Pitt with a bad loss